Right there. Here, I have my mom, my sister-in-law, my brother here with me today, and so that's especially special for me as well to have them be listening to some of my ideas as well. And so with that in mind, let me just sort of get going on what my main idea is. And in many ways, Adil was overly generous in his phrase, but in many ways, particularly when he called me youth, I don't think of myself as that as well. I think I'm sadly now in a different category. But I look at you all and I do see the potential of Pakistan. I do see the youth, both just of Pakistan, but other parts of the world as well. And in many ways, my talk is a way of acknowledging what I think you all can offer to the world. And if I were to summarize what I'm saying, it's going to be that. But I'm going to start, first of all, by just, as I said, starting, this is Adil's contribution. अफराद के हाथों में है इक़वाम की तकदीर हर फर्द है मिल्लत का मुक़द्दर का सितारा. And in many ways, to me, this verse signifies, when Adil and I were talking about this particular talk, we were coming about what would be a perfect way to start this. And I think this really epitomizes what I'm talking about, which is each one of our individuals, our destiny is really in our control. There's a very easy sense of blaming others. We do it as individuals, we do it as nations, we lose agency. And I think Iqbal reminds us that actually, no, not only do we have our own destiny in our hands, when we start thinking like that, we bring our nation's future in our hands as well. And what I'd like us to think over the course of this talk, honestly, if the only thing you take from this talk is this idea that you have agency and you can actually bring about actualized change, I think I've succeeded, right? So I want us to kind of keep that in mind. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to intersperse a bunch of econ with a bunch of data, with a bunch of theory, with some poetry. You've probably never seen that happen and never will again, perhaps for good reason. I want to situate ourselves in what's happening in the field. I'm in international development, and the field of international development is in a crisis. Akim is here, and he knows he was the head of UNDP till last year, this year, actually, very recently. So you've led sort of major development organizations. And in many ways, there is a crisis in our field, which started with Trump's dismantling of USAID, one of the biggest investors in this space. And it's not just what's happening in the US. These are just some news items. It's happening in the US, it's happening in the UK, it's happening in a lot of richer countries, where this notion of what we did in development is losing a bit of steam, right? We're no longer willing to put as much resources in the act of development. Shazia. Sorry, I'm distracted. I know another good friend who's also a Rhodes Scholar who did not contribute any verses for me, before Sazia blames me for. So there is this kind of moment of crisis. And for me, one thing I've learned in life is, look, every tragedy has an opportunity built into it. There is a real tough moment. If you're in the US right now, and if you want to work in, say, Washington, half our graduates from the Kennedy School don't have jobs right now. There's over several thousand people in the Washington area who have no jobs. There's about 100,000 people who are affected in the world over because of this reduction in funding. So this is a really desperate moment. But I actually think it's a great moment. The one challenge with a lot of us in the world of decision making is there's a lot of status quo bias. It's very difficult to get us to move. It takes a crisis to get us to come up with new ideas. And I think we're in a moment of crisis. So in many ways, what I'm going to do is give a hope in this moment of crisis. But let me first explain how we got here. It's very easy when you're in this moment of crisis or the moment of tragedy to negate all the things that have happened before. It's very easy to read the tea leaves in a depressing way. And I want to make sure we read the tea leaves correctly over here. So how we got here, so first of all, let's just put things in perspective. If you look at the last several hundred years, we've had a period of several hundred years where basically nothing much happened. I'm apologizing to people who love those historical periods. That's not quite true, but let me give it in terms of the numbers. If you look at something like income per capita or income per person, you can see from 1200 to about the mid 1700s, nothing much is happening in terms of improvement, at least on this metric in life. And then the Industrial Revolution happens, and that gives some momentum going. But then you can start seeing something special is beginning to happen in the early 900s. And this is like, if you're a finance guy, this is what you want to invest in when you see a return like this. The world is giving you this massive return, right? And it's just spectacular. And I want to acknowledge that this change was phenomenal, and this change was essentially a product of us as humanity, coming together in a very impressive way. And there's a question at this point. This is the time when we make tremendous investments in poverty alleviation. And you start saying, what prompted that? And it's very much, think of the world in the 1930s and 1940s. This is a world which emerges from Great Depressions and from two wars. It's a period where humanity feels as fragmented, as antagonistic as it can ever be. Maybe it's a resonating moment in today's world, but this has happened before, right? And in this moment, we come together instead of sort of worried about what's going to happen. I don't know why that little image is showing up. That's a colleague's Okay, oh, it goes away and something else happens. This is a moment where poverty is becoming, it's the first time, I think, I'm writing a book on this, where poverty becomes a global mission, right? There's an agreement on this. And there are tragedies which prompt this. So the Bengal famine, Amartya gets a Nobel for this. The Bengal famine is a real moment of crisis in the world when we see starvation in ways that you think shouldn't be happening in the world, right? And Amartya's famous thesis is this wasn't a lack of food. It was an allocation problem. There's a famine happening in parts of India when other parts of India have food abundance, right? So this firmly, for the first time, brings in this idea of policy, that policy could have been effective. So we come together and we build these phenomenal institutions. I recently visited Bretton Woods, and it kind of, if you haven't done it in the US, you should go there. It gives you chills, because you go to a room, and in that room, for me, I'm getting chills when I see economists. John Maynard Keynes is sitting there with John Kenneth Galbraith, with a bunch of leaders in the world. And they're sitting there deciding whether the world should come together after all these conflicts and wars. 3 sitting presidents show up to this meeting as well. And they decide we're going to come up with this structure, which is just a phenomenal structure when it gets set up. Again, I want us to recognize this was not an easy thing to do. This could have gone either way. And so I want us to celebrate the fact that we came together in this moment of crisis and we built something that has lasted decades. It's not just this. Civil society starts starting. Oxfam comes up in these early days. This continues. This wave of not just the government, but civil society coming together and trying to tackle the biggest challenges that we faced happens at this time as well. There's basically a grand global Marshall Plan. If you look at funding at this time, this is from the 1960s to a couple of years ago, there's a massive increase in support. Right? So as much as you can decry the pulling back of money, you need to recognize this comes from a position where there was massive increase in these resources poured in the world. This is an age of big construction of projects. This is, by the way, the World Bank came to fame. For those of you who are Pakistani, a little flex point. Pakistan was the reason the World Bank became successful, right? Why? Because the World Bank negotiated the Indus Water Basin Treaty and built these dams. This was one of the most successful. Not only, imagine making peace between India and Pakistan. Just think about how you do that. This is a bunch of World Bank guys saying we can negotiate water sharing. For those of, there's some researchers who work on water over here. Negotiating a water treaty is non-trivial. Then building an infrastructure which is actually useful is non-trivial. This is what happens at this time. This is also the age of, and I want to give a shout out to Akeem, this is also the age of the UN really coming in and bringing a consensus in the world about MDGs. They subsequently become SDGs. We're all agreeing. You know, I have a hard time getting 5 of my faculty in a room to agree on one thing. The fact that you can get nations to agree on a set targets and what we want to do is a non-trivial. For any of you who's tried to negotiate anything, for those of you who are lawyers, you know what I'm talking about, it's just a painful exercise. And we do this, right? I don't want to just give credit to this. There's also technological innovation happening as well. In some sense, Marshall, for those of you who remember Marshall, economic historians over here, Marshall was really worried about one simple thing. Marshall had learned math in a way we do too, and Marshall had learned linear increase and exponential increase. And Marshall said a very simple thing, which is food grows linearly, population grows exponentially, and so we are going to be really in trouble in the world because we will simply not have enough food to sustain ourselves, right? What Marshall failed to estimate, and I don't blame Marshall for this because maybe the people around him didn't quite inspire him. He failed to estimate that human productivity can get us out of all sorts of situations. He failed to predict the Green Revolution. So we start producing food at an even more exponential rate than we start producing kids, right? And that's what you see in the Green Revolution. If you see something like Pakistan, I'm going to bring a lot of Pakistan examples in honor of Iqbal as well. Pakistan becomes the poster child for the Green Revolution. It's spectacular. You may remember Ayub fondly or not fondly, depending on all sorts of things he did. But during that period, we are experiencing the Green Revolution, right? Productivity is just skyrocketing in Pakistan. So that's another contributor to this moment of brilliance. There's also a moment where the world comes together. So globalization and trade. It wasn't just the humanists coming in, the macro trade guys were coming in as well and say, we want to build a collected world. We want to build a connected world. And so this is beginning to happen as well. It's not just ODA. Remittances are going up. FDI is going up. This is really a world where we're all willing to talk to each other, invest in each other, share resources with each other. So what happens? We saw massive gains in poverty alleviation at this point, right? When the 40s and 50s start, extreme poverty is sitting at around 60%. Now, I should have had people guess this. Now it's about 8%. This is spectacular. If you just look at this graph, this is a unbelievable, in a period of about 80 to 90 years, this is success, right? Now, you may say, well, this is just a pure economist view of this world. What about other things? If you care about maternal mortality, massive improvements. If you care about life expectancy, massive improvements, right? This is the age, this is the heyday of development in many ways. And I want us to celebrate that. Before we start getting worried and criticizing, we should start by acknowledging what has been achieved. And I do this for two purposes. One, to give us momentum, positive momentum. Second, to make us realize that things can work. No matter how bleak things look like, there are ways we can design ourselves out of problems that we may have inadvertently created. You can look at other things, like if you care about women's participation, this is a period of massive increase on, this is just one metric, women's political participation. If you care about access to technology, again, you may have different views on the welfare of this, but still, connectivity of individuals is a big deal. And again, for all of us who might whine and complain about how my kid is never getting off social media, which I do as well, you have to recognize that in a span of when I was an undergrad, I remember this is what, I'll tell you how long ago it was, some time ago, I could only call my mom, which may have been a good thing for both of us, once every several months. I couldn't make a phone call because it was just impossible. In fact, I remember using AT&T. For those of you who remember something called AT&T, I would call, and it would cost me like $4 for a minute's conversation. And that's what I would do. I would have a minute's conversation. I'd be like, my mom would be, everything okay? Everything okay? You're alive? I'm alive. Good job. Done, right? Now I can literally call my mom and say, "Ghar mein teende pake hain ki nahi aaj?" Right? That's the extent. Now, that sounds trivial, but the amount of connectivity we've created globally is just mind-boggling. And you take it all for granted. You don't even think about it, right? So I want to say there is this amazing success. Now, you might say, well, Asim, if such great success, are we done with development? Maybe this shouldn't be a talk about development. Maybe you should talk about something else, right? And I would argue that, there are, I'm not painting just a rosy picture. I'm also excited when we can show challenges in the world. They are challenges, right? We know these things. There's a massive increase in global inequality, right? We should recognize that. It's not just an increase. The right graph is even more depressing. This is from Piketty's work, where you're looking at what fraction of growth is happening amongst different income segments. And you can see not only is there huge inequality, this problem is exacerbating itself, right? It's increasing. The growth of income at the top segment is much larger than the growth of income amongst the poor, right? So we're going to be diverging more and more. We have individuals who are richer than countries. For a second, think about that. A person, you may or may not like that person, is richer than a country. Okay. We also have, obviously, the same thing I said, which was longevity, can be flipped around as we have an aging population. Okay. We also have, obviously, environmental disasters that we're creating ourselves. And in my area of work, I do a lot of work in education. This is in the US, and I just want to demonstrate the US's failure, the spectacular failure in this. This is test scores over a 50-year period. And this patient has died, right? It's flatlined. There's no improvements in test scores. What is even more stark in this picture is if you tie this with investments, this is a period where we poured more and more money. This is just investment in global education. Gates, 70 million, our UK government over here, DFID, $1.5 billion, the World Bank, 45. These are massive investments in education. When you put these numbers together, this is not rocket science. If you have a numerator which is flat and a denominator which is increasing, guess what happens to that fraction? It goes down. We have a period in the last several decades where educational productivity has rapidly declined. And it's bizarre. Like most sectors you think during this period, this is a period where technology comes in, data science comes in, all these funky things comes in. And if anything, we have declining productivity. So something is deeply going wrong in this world. And so that comes to our question to say, do we need to reimagine development? And I would argue that what brought about the brilliance of this Bretton Woods system was a disastrous world. We were forced to rethink, enough is enough. We need to create something new. I think we're in that moment again. And it's a choice we get to make, just like we made in the 1940s. Do we bring the world together, or do we bring walls up further? And I don't want to underestimate this moment. This is a critical moment for all of us, whether I'm sitting in the US or in the UK or Pakistan or Nigeria or Malaysia. There's a question we should be all asking ourselves is this a moment of cohesion or is this a moment of conflict, right? I obviously am in one side of this. I believe in the cohesion argument, not the conflict argument, but I want us to pause in this moment. And I honestly, if you ask me right now and I predict the future, I think we can go either way, right? I'm not sure which way we'll land. And I don't want to make a value judgment over here. I think they're smart. I don't want to say deplorables and smart people and stupid people. That's not my point. There are actual serious conversations happening, and it's hard for us to figure out. And I think just as much in the 1940s, it wasn't obvious what to do. There's a bit of a blind jump of faith over here. There's a bit of leap of faith to say, this is the way we should go. It worked out 70, 80 years ago. The question is, what is that moment for us now? And if you thought I was done with Iqbal, I'm not. This is another contribution by a friend of mine. And I love this verse from Iqbal as well. Wahi jahan hai tera, jisko tu kare paida. Ye sange khisht nahi, jo teri nigah mein hai. Right? And what Iqbal is telling us is the world is what you make of it. You know, sometimes people talk about AI as if there's some weird alien force coming and inflicting on them. AI is a choice we get to make. If I ever have anyone tell me about is AI going to be skill complementing or skill substituting, I hate that question. My response is, you tell me what you want AI to be. If you think of yourself as helpless, you're not making the world that you can create. Iqbal says you can create your world, right? Create your own world in the way you want it, and do not let the brick and stone to me, Iqbal, is the existing infrastructure. Do not be constrained by the limitations of the existing infrastructure. If you do, your mind won't be unbounded. Your imagination will be constrained. So the question for us is, what is the existing infrastructure? As much as I love this structure I talk about, I shouldn't get overly in love with it because then I can't give up on it, right? If you think this global infrastructure is still the same and you try and just rebuild it slightly, I'm not sure you'll get there. And so I'm going to push something more aggressive than that. And the aggression in a good way is going to be, I want us to start moving away, and it's bizarre for me to say this, I want us to start moving away, as a development economist, it's bizarre, from poverty to thinking about potential. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. What is this poverty to potential move? Let me build that up. And so the next part of the talk is going to be more a conceptual framework with some empirics to it about how this way of thinking about development can change things. So this is the traditional view of development, especially when you think of poverty alleviation. There's a bunch of people who are below the poverty line. I'm giving you one poverty line, $2.15. That's an extreme poverty line. We have about, I think about 700 million people so far below this line. So it's not an insignificant number. That 8% of the world is still a pretty large number. And one version of development is everyone below the line needs to be moved at the line. Okay? This is what poverty alleviation traditionally means. The estimates of what you need to do this, depending on what model you use and what assumptions you use, is anywhere from $200 billion a year to $1 trillion a year. So you need an annual infusion of this much money. Just to put things in perspective, USAID, which was a disaster, was 60 billion. So if you're going to raise 1 trillion, it's never going to happen. There's no way the world is going to come together, given the directions, given the tea leaves is, and say, okay, you know what, we used to give a few hundred billion, now we're going to give $1 trillion. Never going to happen, okay? So if we keep relying on that perspective, I don't think this is going to be a solvable problem. So I'm going to argue we should do something differently, okay? And by the way, when you take this view of the world, the other thing you don't realize is there are not many countries anymore which fit this description, right? So when you take this view of development, you not only focus on only people below the line, you end up only focusing on a few countries. There's a debate going on in the UK when aid cuts are happening, which countries should make the list and which shouldn't. I think that's an entirely stupid question, because we create a zero-sum process when it shouldn't be a zero-sum process. We need to create a positive-sum process. So how do we begin to do that? Okay, this is the Farsi poetry, which I have no idea how to read. So what I did instead was I tried my best, and I then went to a friend of mine who's Iranian actually, who's a phenomenal professor in Berkeley, and said, can you just read this for me? So I'm just going to have him, in the honor of Iqbal, you can look at the translation, I'm going to have him read it out.
پیش خورشید آزمودن خوشتر است پیکر فرسوده را دیگر تراش امتحان خویش کن موجود باش این چنین موجود محمود است و بس ورنه نار زندگی دود است و بس.
So the only downside of having my friend read this out, and you know how terrible I was when I'm pronouncing even Urdu. Those of you who are Farsi lovers, this is just beautiful the way he's reading this out. But the words are beautiful, right? What Iqbal says is each one of you has a particle of glow inside you. And that's just a beautiful concept to say each one of us has this little glow inside you. And what he's telling us is do something with this glow. In fact, he's telling us that this glow can be, you should test yourself against the sun. Just imagine you're some small little spark. You're like not even a diya. And he's saying, go and challenge the sun. There are physicists in the room as well. The amount of solar energy you're trying to fight against is phenomenal. And he's saying you can do that. And I think this is brilliant. And he says, otherwise, the fire of life is mere smoke. If you're not willing to do that, you're just blowing smoke up, whatever. So this is what Iqbal is saying. And I want to take this seriously. I want to say, what does it mean for us to recognize that each one of us has this brilliant glow inside? If we truly see that, I would argue we start seeing people completely differently. I'll explain in a bit. Let me actually give you a story. So I'm going to go from verses to a personal story to a bunch of theory, sort of, and then some empirics, right? I'm going to give you the whole spectrum of my schizophrenia. The story is, I love Pakistan because I love education. I love education because I love seeing learners. If you ever feel depressed about any country, especially Pakistan, just go outside and go to a school, any school. Don't wear your, the school doesn't have the same library as I do. Forget that for a second. Just talk to kids, okay? So, and every time I do that, I learn something different. So this is a fun conversation I had where I'm going to call these two siblings Saima and Nadeem. That's not their real names. And I have a conversation. Now, when you go in any of these schools, especially if you're an outsider, especially if you look like you're from better means, often the teacher will bring the best kids and they'll sit in front of you, they'll stop classroom instruction and they'll say, come talk to my kids. Because they're showcasing, and it's a fun moment, right? I'm a bit worried about taking away from curriculum, but why not? Just for a little while. It's like a little tour you have. So I have this moment where I go to this village. It's in the outskirts of Islamabad in a semi-rural area. So these two, there's a bunch of kids. One of the girls is just absolutely brilliant. This is Saima. She's just phenomenal. She's one of those kids you see and you just walk away saying, holy shit, she should be in Oxford. And if she's slightly better, maybe Harvard. So you look at this kid, and this kid starts talking to me, and she's just amazing. She wants me to test her. She says, look, here's a book. Pick the book up on any page, start the first line, and I'll tell you the next paragraph. And she does it. I don't know if memorization is a great skill, but anyways, she has it. Okay. Then she talks about how she wants to be a doctor. We have this really poignant conversation between how much money she needs. She says, how many years did you study? I said 16 years. She's like, well, that sounds like a long time. I was like, I think we can do it. How much does it take to be a doctor? She has a sense of that. She says she wants to be a mental doctor, not a mental doctor, but a psychiatrist. And I said, why? Because we laugh a bit about how Pakistan needs mental support. We have a really fun conversation. So this happens. And then she says to me in the course of this conversation that I can't afford medical school. She says to me, I don't have the money for it. And she says to me, I don't have the money for it. And my friends tell me that I can't be a doctor because I don't have the money for it. Okay. My instinct at that moment is the charitable instinct. I can easily write a check for her and pay for her entire medical education. It's trivial for me. My instinct is to say to her, don't worry, I'll pay for your education. But for a second, I just hold that instinct off. I decide just to let it rest for a bit. In my mind, I'm like, maybe I should write a check before I go, but I'm thinking about that. Okay? In the course of this conversation, we start talking about, I want to lighten the moment. So I say, what do you do to play with? I play with dolls. That's great. I have this doll. So we start talking about her doll. And I said, well, that's a nice doll. Where do you get it? She said, my brother sold it to me. The brother is this kid, Nadeem, who during this time is completely silent and every once in a while is being made fun of by his sister for being stupid. In a nice way. Not really knows what he's doing. Then she says, I said, well, that's funny. How did your brother give you this doll? And she says, well, he sold it to me. And by the way, my brother has sold dolls to every kid in this, not dolls, but toys to every kid in this school, because what he does is he goes to the trash heap, picks up discarded toys, fixes them, and sells them. So suddenly this kid, who was otherwise an idiot, supposedly, shows up in a very different way to me. So I look at this kid and I said, have you heard of an MBA? What is that? I said, do you know you're an entrepreneur? And I say it publicly in front of the other kids. I say, you're just as brilliant as your sister is, just in a different way. And I leave making a deal with this kid, which is you will be super successful in life and you will make as much money as you want to make. Okay? And my deal with you is you will fund your sister's education. And he laughs and smiles, and I say to the sister, and you will see his kids for free. She says yes. And I walk away without writing a check for anyone. I don't know if I did the right or wrong thing. I'm not trying to claim. My instinct there was not to write a check. My instinct there was to leave having these two individuals believe in who they are and believe they can together support each other. Okay? This is what it means to recognize potential. When we walk into poor places, we cannot help but feel sorry for the people we see. That is a great instinct, but it's not the best instinct. Because the best instinct is not to have pity on the people. The best instinct to say, this person who I'm feeling sorry for today could tomorrow be someone who helps me. And if you don't think like this, if you think like this, test yourself. Ask yourself, how many times have you given money to some person and thought that tomorrow this person may give money to me? And if you have not done so, then you're not recognizing potential. It's a harsh test to use. I fail that test all the time. Because your instinct as a good human being, as an empathetic human being, is to feel like you have something special and they don't, and you should give them something slightly from the special thing you have, so they get slightly better off. Okay? That's not what investing in potential is. So now some math. Okay. He goes from this like wild emotional journey. Sorry, I'm slightly unstable, so I apologize for that. It's my endearing trait, as some of my friends have told me. How do you formalize this idea? So in economics, we have this idea of a production possibility frontier, which is you look at a firm or a country and you say this country has inputs, land, people, natural resources, and you ask yourself, what is the maximum combination of different goods that country can make using those resources? Are you being productively efficient? I would argue we can take that exact same notion and create something called an individual productivity frontier, an individual productivity possibility frontier, which is take the innate attributes. So I have this weird mix of being very strongly faith-inspired and then very strongly rational. For some people, that feels like a contradiction. For me, it doesn't. So I have this blind faith. It's not, I haven't tested it and I'm trying to test it, is that every human being has some innate talent. In the Islamic sense, I would say you have an amana. You've been given a gift. Okay? All of us have it. The gift may be different. And one tragedy of life is you never get to see your gift. You don't know what it is. No one tells you you're an entrepreneur. No one tells you you are this high interpersonal skill kid. No one tells you you're a math genius. Because the system doesn't quite recognize that. Okay? By the way, one of the most rare skills to me, and you know friends like these who have no obvious skill, terrible in every subject, including art, yet when you put them in a group, they make everyone more productive. They have this weird magic. Those individuals are the most valuable, if you know from anyone in the corporate sector, by far the most valuable person in your team. There are other people who are brilliant and make everyone worse in the team. Which skill do you have? Which skill do you recognize? Okay? So if you can go from innate attributes, the first challenge is take people's innate attributes and help them recognize it. Okay? Second, once you've had those attributes recognized, build skills. So this is the kid who would have become Ramanujan. Okay? Amazing math mindset. Ramanujan takes a professor in Cambridge, I think, not Oxford. You guys lost out on that. This kid from India, not kid, 20s, 30s, writes a letter to a professor in Cambridge saying, I don't know what I'm doing. No one's recognized me, but I think I've proven this theorem. And the Cambridge professor says, holy shit. Sorry. he has and says, please come. And this individual lives only if maybe 5 or 10 years more. In those 5 or 10 years, this individual produces spectacular work. Can you imagine in the world if all of those individuals were discovered? Can you imagine what we would like? What kind of innovations and technology and aspirations and inspirations would have happened in this world? It's so exciting, okay? So this is what needs to happen. Realize your skill, realize your talents, convert them into skills, apply those skills to generate benefit in society and to yourself. That's the challenge I pose ourselves. In this world, you create a world of potential, right? Everyone in the world, I haven't shaded the US on purpose, but you can. It's not that the US doesn't have underprivileged areas. In fact, if you want to feel really depressed, you go to some of the really downtrodden areas. I was talking to someone who works in Dorchester, here, right? I was giving a talk on Saturday with a bunch of alumni, and this lady works in, not Gloucester, sorry, not Dorchester is in the US, Gloucester. And she was telling me how in Gloucester, it's just terrible. Like crime is high. There's so many people who have untapped potential in a place like Gloucester, okay? So the world opens up. And let me give you a sense of, let me go empirics now. How big can this thing be? Let's monetize it, okay? So I'm going to give you a very simple example of how to think about a calculation you can do. There's many calculations you can do. I'm starting on this literature. So you can say, imagine this is the income distribution. There are 10 people in both countries, Nigeria and the US. In Nigeria, the bottom 6 people are all equally poor. They earn $1 a day. The top 4 earn $10 a day. In the US, the bottom 3, there aren't that many poor people. The bottom 3 earn $5. The top 7 earn $50. And what you're going to say is, maybe I can use the US as a benchmark. Maybe I can say there's no reason why Nigeria shouldn't have the same income distribution as the US, because the US is at least doing a slightly better job of having people discover their skills and apply their skills. So let's do that math. And the math will have several components to it. The first thing you can do is, okay, these 3 people in Nigeria who are super poor, let's keep them relatively super poor, but give them the US income. So that's a $1 to $5 jump. That's a $4 increase per person, okay? The second thing, and this is going to be an even more interesting effect, is those 3 people to the right of the first 3, they really shouldn't be belonging in the bottom end of the distribution. One way to think about them is they didn't acquire the skills that they would have gotten in the US. So you should move those 3 people to the right. And if you move these 3 people to the right, the gain you get is $49 now, right? Because these people should have been more skilled and earning more money. So each of these individuals now gives you $49. Okay, so you have those individuals. Then you have the last group, which is the top income earners in Nigeria, but they're not earning enough income, right? If you want to be really stylized about this, think of this as Aliko Dangote, one of the richest Nigerians, isn't as rich as Elon Musk. So what does it take for Dangote to become Musk? Why is Musk so special, right? Why is Bezos so special? You look at them, they don't look particularly special, okay? So, you know, or they look as special as Dangote does or Ambani does, okay? So this is a game. Now, if you integrate this over across, and we've done this exercise, we've taken actual data and we've integrated this calculation over the world. What you get is really phenomenal. So now think of the same picture. People below the line, people above the line. In this picture, everyone is our subject of interest, not just people below the line. All of them move into a differential zone of potential. I'm not saying it's the same, it may be different for people. We estimate this would add, not require. Remember the previous calculation, you need maybe 200 billion to a trillion. Infusion. This is a generation. These individuals collectively would generate about $200 trillion. That's twice world GDP every year. That's the thing we're missing. By the way, this is an underestimate. In this world, I'm truncating the distribution to 10%. I'm throwing out the top 10% of the world. So I'm actually ignoring Elon Musk. I'm not making Lakshmi Mittal into Elon Musk. I'm just ignoring that they even exist. If I start including those guys, this number can go up ridiculously high. 400 trillion, 600 trillion. Because, like it or not, those individuals are massive contributors to GDP. Okay? So maybe the problem isn't that Elon Musk exists. Maybe the problem is that we don't have every variant of Elon Musk in every part of the world, so that the effect a single Elon Musk can have is moderated by the effect of other different types of Musks. Maybe you're like horrified at this thought of like Musk flavors. But it opens up this set of possibilities. And when you do this, we can estimate this for the world, and I can give you for every part of the world, I have data. I can actually show you not just in the world, but states in India or places where I can say, where is the missing potential? Where is the part of the world which is most likely to see these potential gains, these GDP, these wealth gains. And I want to be very clear. I'm giving GDP as an outcome. I don't believe economic success is the only outcome. You can think of these outcomes as, if you ask me what is the biggest problem in the world, it's not wealth right now. The biggest problem in the world is we lack empathy. We deeply lack empathy. We're going to look back at this moment in history and say, what the hell was humanity doing? For lots of, I'm not taking a political stance over it. I'm just saying the world over, we're desensitized to human suffering. In this world with the resources we have, if a kid starves, it's insane. That should not be possible, but it is, right? If a kid is killed or abused, that should be impossible, but it is happening. Okay? So there's a sense in which I want to make sure that when we talk about potential, even though I'm giving you economic numbers, I'm giving economic numbers because I'm countering an argument made on economic numbers. But I don't just believe in this. Why is this even more important now? The biggest problem in the world right now is not environmental issues or inequality. I kind of cheated a bit. I showed you one thing. The biggest problem in the world is the fact that there are too few of us, actually. When you look at best demographic estimates, in another 60 years, we're going to hit 10 billion peak population, and then look at this. These are different estimates by really reliable democracies. In some of these estimates, now you might say, who cares? 60 years, I'm still not going to be alive. I'll tell you that she's worried today as well. Even if you think you're 85 and you only have a few years left, you should still be worried. This number is around 1 billion. So by some estimates, in 200 to 300 years, the world will be 1 billion people. This population we have is a blip in human history. For most of humanity, we were in the few hundred millions. Okay? Why is that important? It's important because this is where us older people should be really worried, which is in the 1950s, this is what a population pyramid looked like, which it should look like. It's a very stable population pyramid. These guys are annoyingly being fed by these guys. And then these guys are being supported by these guys. So the entire weight of the economy is on this part of the distribution, which is the productive working population. Okay? We care about this population because these guys invest here and they create successful people in the middle in 20, 25 years. What's beginning to happen in the world? This pyramid is no longer a pyramid. It's becoming unstable. In most countries, Social Security is failing because the deal was these individuals would pay to feed those. And one benefit of longevity, which is its cost, is now these individuals, the way we have constructed society, are taking more from society than giving back to society. I want to be careful. The way we constructed society, this is not necessary. If you in France think you're brilliant by extending the retirement age from 62 to 64, that's nothing. And 75 or 80-year-old is incredibly productive. Why are we not taking advantage of the skills and knowledge we have? Why are we saying, no, you're out of the labor force? So, and this is going to get worse. So the only question we have in this world is not how do we sustain, it's impossible to raise fertility, by the way. East Asia has tried. Hong Kong's fertility rate is 0.7. You think they aren't paying people and women to have more kids? For those of you women in the audience, it's insulting to say, hey, here's $10,000, stop, have one more child. What do you think the career cost for you is when you do that? What is the NPV of lost earnings and lost success and lost life satisfaction when you're forcing an individual and a family to take that decision? It just doesn't work. So so fertility increase aren't going to happen. We have to make everyone more productive in society in whatever ways possible. Okay? AI's revolution is not replacing humans. That's the stupidest thing. How do we replace humans? You have no humans. The only thing AI should do is make humans more productive. That's the problem you're solving. You're solving a 5-year problem. What's wrong with you? You should be solving a 20, 25, 50-year problem, right? And this is the way in the entire VC industry is so short-sighted because they can't think beyond 5-year returns. But, we as society should. So we should reimagine the development process, and I'll end a few minutes now. We should reimagine the development process to maximize potential and not just minimize poverty. So you forgot Iqbal had gone, but he's back. I love this verse of Iqbal as well. Karenge ahle nazar, taza bastiyan abad. Meri nigah nahi, suए Kufa aur Baghdad. And what Iqbal is telling you at this point is, and so by those whose eyes see and far and wide, not the VC guys. No offense to the VCs in the audience. They want a 5 or 10-year return. Exit quickly. The guys who are going to see us to success are those who see far and wide. Okay? In doing that, you will found new cities, you will create new worlds, which don't exist right now. Okay? And it's not going to be, this is the time when Kufa and Baghdad are regarded as the pinnacles of civilization. I don't know what your favorite country of pinnacle civilization is, whether it's Oxford or Cambridge, and I mean our Cambridge, not yours. He's saying, forget those guys. Forget Washington. Forget New York, forget London. Your vision needs to be unbounded. New stars will emerge. Okay? So let's take this seriously. I'm going to give you 3 things. There's lots more. There's a lot of literature on this which is beginning to be developed. I'm contributing to it. This entire year, my center that I lead is coming up with this idea of reimagining development. We have lots of really superbly smart people coming up and talking. I'm going to share you with a few very nascent ideas on this. These will not satisfy you. They don't satisfy me either, but they give us an opening conversation to have. Raj is sitting in the audience and he tells me, you always give away too much. So I'm going to do exactly what he said after 40 minutes of not doing what he said, which is I'm just going to give you little tidbits of where I think we should be going. First of all, stop putting people in the denominator. Now you might say, well, we're not doing that. Every damn measure which is per capita is doing exactly that. I had a colleague once, name him, he was based in a university here, who looked at the AIDS crisis in South Africa and said, you know what? It was actually good for growth. Actually, COVID was great for growth. Anyone want to tell me why COVID is great for growth? Anyone? You said it. We can say it. We limited ourselves. Yeah, actually, there's lots of reasons. There's some other things that COVID has done. But the idea was, if easy way to raise GDP per capita is reduce the denominator. And you might say, well, we've never done that. The entire Ford Foundation's investment was controlling fertility. We never lost Marshall's concern. Too many people. So if you put people in the denominator, control becomes your problem. Any of these measures are like that. And you might say, okay, so I'm arguing I hate GDP per capita as a measure for 2 reasons. It forces you to put people are a liability, not an asset anymore. Second, it's what I would call a symptomatic measure. If you tell someone you have a low GDP per capita, what are you supposed to do with that? How do you change that? What's the solution? Raise GDP per capita. Oh, great. Thank you for that deep diagnostic. It's like you're a doctor and you have high blood pressure, and the doctor says, you have high blood pressure. I'm like, yeah, dumbass, I can see that myself. What next? You need some differential diagnosis. You need someone to tell you have high blood pressure because you eat too much salt. Or with high blood pressure, you have protein diet, or your genetics are screwed up, sorry. I need something. I need to be convinced that I need to take lisinopril blood pressure medicine or just eat better. And if it's genetic, to hell with it. I'm just going to eat all the salt because I'm screwed anyways. I have bad genes. I'm just going to take medicine and solve the problem, right? And so I need to know this. So what should you start doing? Redefine success. What does it mean to put people in the numerator? You have totally different measures of measuring success in a nation. I would argue instead of measuring any of these symptoms, stop measuring blood pressure, or at least maybe you can do it, but don't care too much about it. Start measuring things which prevent individuals from reaching their potential. These are very different measures. You might say, well, these are stupid measures, they don't exist. They do actually. The World Bank created something called the ease of doing business measure, which is a measure that if you're an entrepreneur, there's several entrepreneurs in the audience, you know how difficult it is. If you're you set up a company here. Why not to Pakistan? Are you not patriotic enough? Tell me why.
There's no ease of doing business.
It's impossible. How many people do you have to bribe to get one permit? We're creating frictions from entrepreneurs existed in our ecosystems. Measure that damn thing. Because then it tells you what to do. Reduce the friction. There are educational frictions. There's accessing finance frictions. There's accessing justice frictions, right? There's accessing technologies. There's exporting frictions. There's so many. We should have a measure of frictionization index of an economy and say, are you low on the friction index or not? And if you're not, work towards it. Okay? So that's an easy thing to do for measurement. Okay? There's also systems thinking. I'm giving an example for 30 years of education work I'm doing in Pakistan, which is all this strategy. The way you do this work is you look at parents or teachers or public schools or private schools, and you simply say, what are frictions in this? What's a friction in education? I, as a parent, don't know what a good or bad school is. That's a friction. Give report cards, you solve the friction. What's a friction in a labor market? I'm a phenomenal teacher. I'm a woman. I don't know where to teach because there's employment discrimination. And so I need to be given good wages. Can you fix the labor market constraint? Anytime we've done this, we have massive returns in test scores. I don't want to summarize this work. If you want to read it, this is called the LEAPS work in Pakistan. We have generated some of the highest economic returns in anything in education in terms of the graph I showed you in the US. We have done far better than the US has. The US should be learning from us. So should the UK, okay? Because we've done better than you guys, the guys over here. Okay, so that's one. Second, redefine knowledge creation. I think there's and this is now a critique on us. We think the only places of brilliant knowledge is like Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and MIT and Princeton and Yale and maybe Tsinghua, right? But this idea that there's a scarcity of knowledge is a fundamental mistake. There is not a scarcity of knowledge in the world. There's over-indexing on a few success stories. If anyone says Finland to me again, please shoot me and them. I'm sick and tired of hearing about Singapore and Finland. They're like not even bigger than Johor Town. And you're telling me that I should think of Pakistan like Johor Town and just fix, for those of you who know Johor Town, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't know, ask your neighbor. Nordic countries, oh, socialism at its best, okay? India, sorry for my Indian friends, I'm sick of Aadhaar as well. Congratulations, you've done Aadhaar, shut up now. It's not the only success story. Innovation, US, Silicon Valley, blah, 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 industrialization, China or East Asia. Start giving us idea that knowledge, it's not the scarcity of knowledge, it's the scarcity of knowledge producers. Knowledge doesn't happen when I write a paper and I write a policy brief and I give it to some bureaucrat in Ghana and say, please apply this. That's not knowledge creation. That's mimicry of knowledge. You should go to those environments in Ghana, and this is what Adil said. The reason I'm proud of SERP, I've mentioned SERP over here, is SERP's biggest accomplishment to me is that SERP doesn't need me or Atif or others, because we have generated phenomenal, several of them are in this room, who are going to be far better than I ever will. So you're creating this positive cycle of brilliant people who are constantly producing the knowledge you need. And by the way, there are much better success stories out there. Pakistan has done better in education than any country in the world over the last 2 decades. I'll be writing a paper on this. Look forward to it. I won't tell you more. Applying Raj's principle. Read the paper if you're interested. Okay. Rwanda, phenomenal social protection. Ukraine and Estonia, unbelievable digital public access services. Phenomenal improvement. Turkey, innovation, massive innovation. Penang in Malaysia, industrialization. Tell more stories. So we feel like it's not just success is for a few places, but in many places. Last thing I want to say is redefine how you invest. Okay? Stop thinking money is the constraint. It is not the constraint. We obsess over this, raising savings, increasing remittances, getting FDI, getting ODA. The data shows the opposite, by the way. This is a paper by colleagues of mine, Carmen Reinhardt and Ken Rogoff. If anything, they show when there's more mobility in the world, this is capital mobility, so higher is good, you have more financial crisis. Now, granted, this is a correlation. We don't know causality, but simply, and the analogy is very simple. If you don't understand finance, think plumbing. Basically the same thing. They both get overpaid. How does finance work? How does plumbing work? If the leaks are, the pipes are leaky, and you put more money in the system, pipes burst. If the financial system is inadequate, you put more money in the financial system, it escapes. It does weird things. It does speculation. It does corruption. It doesn't lead to growth. And you might say, well, I don't know about that. Here's a brilliant example. Now, Pakistan shows up in not so good a light. 9/11 was great for Pakistan. Sorry, don't quote me on that. Why was 9/11 great for Pakistan? Let me explain. It's a massive capital influx. In fact, most Muslim countries massively benefited on the capital side because people were afraid of money outside. They brought it back into Pakistan. What you see at the red line is 9/11. This is foreign exchange reserves in Pakistan. Massive increase. This is an economy unexpectedly flush with money. Money is cheap. What you should hope happens in this economy is there's a massive increase in entrepreneurship. That's entrepreneurship on the right side, lending to firms. But this is every single firm. This is all the loans in Pakistan made. The data we have is nothing. Now, we can speculate. I'll again leave it up to a discussion to say, where did the money go? It's fun stories to tell. It definitely didn't go into innovation and entrepreneurship. Okay? So if your thesis was money was a constraint, these two examples seem to counter that. So stop thinking of money as a constraint. Stop focusing on sectors and projects. Think about people. This is a SERP CEO's share to me, which I thought was beautiful as well. एतायर लाहूती इस रिस्क उस रिस्क से मौत अच्छी जिस रिस्क से आती हो परवाज में कोताही. And this is to me like money. What he's saying is, if you think you need money, risk. If that money constrains you, now think every single loan with some conditionality to it. If that money constrains you, it's better to starve instead. That's what Iqbal is telling us. It turns out he's an economist. So Iqbal is saying, don't, and you might say, well, we never do that. For those of you who thought we did that, just look back at the specs on how we negotiated the Belt Road Initiative or CPEC with China. We made a deal with China that China would never have made with itself. Because we told China, you know what? We're just dumbasses over here, basically. Just come and build the roads for us because we like roads, but we don't know how to build them. We could have gone back to China and said, look, I love the fact that you're coming and building roads, but can you also teach us how to build them? And China would have said, okay, I'm willing to do that, but I need a better deal. And we should have paid that deal. We should have given me worse terms, but invest in my human capital. That's the example of what Iqbal is saying. You took money and you made a bad deal. You thought you made a good deal. It was a terrible deal. Okay? We didn't learn anything from CPEC's investment. And this is a country which is phenomenal. We could learn so much from China. And it's not the Chinese. You can blame the Chinese and say, well, Chinese. It's not that. You just made a stupid deal. No one was stopping you. Chinese didn't say, I don't want to negotiate this. They're like, sure, everything's up for a price. When you go to China and buy cheap plastic imitation electric switches and they break, that's not China's fault. They're also selling to the US. You could have bought more expensive things and had them last longer. We're doing the same thing, right? And so we need to stop thinking in this way. So what should we start doing? And this is something, everything I've talked about, these are not khayali palaus. I'm actually doing each one of these things systematically. So Adil said I should announce this. I'm announcing this. I am in the process of creating a human potential fund in Pakistan, right? Which is something like this. And what I want to do is, by the way, my belief is that the only constraint in development, the meta constraint is people. Everything else is endogenous to that. If you think environmental technology innovation is a constraint, actually, no, that's not the constraint. It's people who can create those technologies. So anything you can think of, I will challenge you and I'll convert that into a people problem. Any problem you have. And if that's the case, then that's very simple. Literally, it's very simple. All we need to do is invest in enabling these individuals to solve all the problems that we're facing. Now, obviously, there are sort of caveats to a bunch of that. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to create this investment talent hub in Pakistan where I literally am creating a set of screeners where you could have individuals, and I want to do 70 million people in Pakistan because that's the number of youth. So let's start with a modest target. And I want all of these individuals to go through some process where they can identify their spectrum of skills. Once we have that, each additional layer gets them to develop those skills further. Okay? In about 15 or 20 years, I'll be done, in many ways. So wait a bit till I give you results on that, but I think that's the exciting thing. And for me, again, I'm going to end with two more Iqbals, verses. This is by a Rhodes Scholar, so you can imagine Rhodes Scholars can't give you a single verse. No, this is not a Rhodes Scholar. The Farsi one was a Rhodes Scholar because, you know, they have to do a different language. जहाँ और भी हैं अभी बेनमूद कि खाली नहीं है ज़मीर वजूद हर एक मुंतज़िर तेरी यलगार का तेरी शौक़ी फ़िक्र किरदार का ये है मकसद गर्दिश रोज़गार कि तेरी खुदी तुझ पे हो आश्कार. And it's again brilliant. Iqbal is telling us the ultimate purpose. There's so many worlds you haven't discovered. There's so much of humanity you haven't seen. Whether that means repopulating Mars, I don't know what that means. Or going in the ocean, or just rediscovering Oxford. But what he tells us is each of these words, each of these latent worlds are waiting for, and he used the word yalgar. It's very interesting. It's a very aggressive word. Yalgar is an attack, an onslaught. He uses the word attack to describe something brilliant. He's waiting for your attack of your exuberant action and thought. Need I say your jihad? I will say that because people get in trouble. And he says the ultimate purpose of this universe, look at what he's saying. The entire purpose of creation is to have you discover who you are. Just phenomenal. It's deeply egotistical as well, but it's phenomenal, right? If you invest in talent, you generate infinite returns. We have now been following children in Pakistan for 20 years. We worked with them in early 2000s. We've tracked their life outcomes. We are getting ROIs of 1,000%, about 10 to 15% a year, simply on the wage earnings from slightly improving their early foundational skills. These are causal estimates for those who are obsessed with causal inference in economics. I will defend these estimates to my death, and I can. But these are just economic estimates. I'm not even valuing life-changing, right? This is by far the best investment for all my investor buddies over here. You just need to have patient return. By the way, if you think we can't have patient return, I find your sector bizarre. You take the most patient form of capital, pension funds and LPs, and you convert them to one of the most impatient forms of capital. It's bizarre. At least keep the term structure of the deals the same. So we should be willing to make long-term investments. And I'm going to end with a verse which is very common for Iqbal, but very personal to me. This is a verse. It's a beautiful verse. Tu shahi hai parwaaz hai kaam tera, tere samne asma aur bhi hain. This is very personal to me because my brother, who I also lost, recited this verse at my dad's funeral, and this verse is written on his gravestone. And the verse to me signifies, my brother was saying for my dad, the implication was in the afterlife. My dad was a larger-than-life character. If I had been in this audience, I wouldn't have been able to speak because he would have interrupted me all the time. But he's saying there's so many more worlds, but it also applies in this world. Whether we're in the other world or this world, Iqbal is telling us there's so many future challenges. Don't be limited by what you think you can do. And so I leave you with that message, which is there's so much amazing work each and every one of you can do. And if you think in a moment of depression that you can't, don't. I'll end with Raj and I talk about philosophies, and Raj has a Indian saint we discussed about. And Raj said to me one thing, and I really appreciate that. I was getting all down about something, and Raj says, your problem, Asim, is you think too much. I was like, what does that mean? I'm trained to think. And he said, you should just do. Stop thinking. And I said to him, no, I don't agree with that, because if I stop thinking, I won't do. And he said to me, and this is a fun challenge, and I'll ask you to do. He said, if you think your natural state as a human is not to do something, try for 15 minutes to sit still and do nothing. And you just can't. Your natural state is to act. Trust the things given to you, whatever space you're in. Don't second guess your space. You're in some space. Act in that space in a way that improves your productivity. I have a PhD advisee, Farah, sitting here as well. I'm thrilled that she's acting in her space. She's doing a PhD at Oxford now. LSE. Sorry, she didn't go to Oxford. She went to LSE. She could have gone to Oxford, but you guys didn't do a good enough job to attract her. There's nothing which gives me more pride when I see people who are investing in spaces where they can act and improve themselves in the world. I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much. Sorry, I think I took long this for a minute, but that's.
We now move into our discussion segment. May I please invite our three discussants to join us on stage. Professor Asim Steiner, former administrator of the United Nations Development Program and now at the Oxford Martin School. Professor Stephen Burkhardt, professor at the Blavatsky School of Government and former chief economist at the FCDO and author of Gambling for Development. Professor Adnan Khan, professor of public policy at the London School of Economics and former chief economist at the FCDO.
Okay.
I would like to again welcome Professor Adil Malik, who will be moderating this session. As well as Professor Khwaja to the stage.
So we'll have about 3 to 4 minute reaction from each one of you, and then we'll come back to Professor Khwaja and then open the floor for discussion. Yeah, so Asim, maybe you could start.
Well, thank you, Adil, first of all, and Asim, thank you for this tour d'horizon, but also tour de force. I mean, I can just see by Mark said to you, you are certainly not going to be an example of a human being sitting quietly and doing nothing for a minute. But thank you also for your perspective and for the horizons that you brought to this lecture today. I want to begin with where you began your lecture. Story of development, actually not just post-Second World War. In human history is actually an extraordinary one. Now, I know you showed this graph to some extent of 600-700 years of not much happening. I know you were provoking your thought, but I mean, the enterprise of development is one of constant discovery. And I think where that historical perspective, first of all, gets lost right now is that the last 50, 60, 70 years have actually been a phenomenal, and one graph you showed us, of exponential improvement in the human condition. Why is that all being forgotten? Why have we lost that sense of perspective? And I'm sure my distinguished colleagues here can give very, very wise answers to that. I will simply throw one thing into the arena and would love you to comment on that also. I think it is more a matter and function of domestic politics than of anything to do with metrics, economics, or other ways of measuring human development. We have been caught in an age where the paradigm is shifting from investing in one another and seeing the future together to one of increasingly essentially declaring our neighbors our enemies, and under the stress of competition in certain parts of the world, finding ourselves disengaging and even deconstructing the architecture that we have built over the last 80 years. The second point, if I can just pick up on that, I'd be interested if you could relate a little bit what you have laid out as, I've forgotten my abbreviation, was it a human potential index? Potential index with Amartya Sen's and Mahbub al-Haq's great work in the past, which obviously, having lived through this as a student here, and Francis Stewart taught me about some of this, and later on in leading UNDP, and also seeing the constant evolution of the Human Development Report, which, by the way, this year, for those of you who are interested in what Asim referred to, when we talk about technologies, digital and AI, this year's report is all about that in development, and basically the subtitle, it's a matter of choice. So I'm completely with you also on this technological kind of fatalism that we have right now, where we oscillate between dystopia and utopia from one minute to another, and we've lost that sense that it's actually up to us. But the problem is, if only some own the entire intellectual property, we will end up again where maybe we don't want to be. But just perhaps if you could comment a little bit on where the index that you have in mind either builds on, diverges, or perhaps takes a whole new frontier into account. Because to me, the most powerful fundamental message of Amartya Sen was also about human capability. Last point that I would simply raise is, I was looking in much of what you were talking about, perhaps a differentiation between the very Western model and perhaps the verses you cited kind of create an interesting intellectual challenge of Allama Iqbal's way of looking at the world that is rooted in a sort of deep individualism about fulfillment. And yet, I think if we look at the world of development of our societies worldwide, and here I claim a little bit of a legitimacy of sitting with you all here today. My professional life began in Pakistan and India, and in the district of Mardan. And those who are perhaps somewhere in Pakistan listening today, old friends, greetings to Mardan and Swabi. And it was essentially this.
What is the World Bank project?
No. Well, you're talking about dams. We could talk about that as well, because I have some long association with the topic of dams. But no, my simple point is just to ask you to perhaps reflect a little bit on where will resilience in our societies be built in looking at the future? Stefan, you have written also about elites and the role they have, and I fully appreciate it, I understand it, but there is a kind of development Darwinism that often creeps in. Economists are very good at this. Social scientists are very good at it, where there is a certain sense of some control. It can be political economy, it can be economics, it can be the financial view of development. And I think what you were putting your finger on this evening is, you know, yes, individuals are, in a sense, the constituting elements of a society, but society's development progress is rooted in something else. And I just end on two examples more as question marks. Take Norway. Norway was the poorest nation in Europe, in fact, Switzerland as well at the beginning of the 20th century. I learned something very unique about Norway, and that was through the building of dams. Norway began building dams, obviously, at the end of the 19th, early 20th century. It was the first country in the world to adopt legislation, I think it was 1912 or 1917, that legislated that if you build a dam, then the upstream communities would have to have a benefit sharing formula built into the dam's revenues. I led the World Commission on Dams 60, 70 years later, and in 99% of the jurisdictions around the world, even this fundamental principle, where you actually deprive maybe a community downstream or upstream of something, was not even thought of. So what was it in Norway's kind of fundamental development ethos or societal dynamic that made benefit sharing such a central part of driving development? And another maybe extreme example is Rwanda. I mean, out of a complete catharsis and disaster, emerges in Southern Africa, or Eastern Africa, depending on how you want to define it, a country that has transformed its development trajectory literally out of the most catastrophic moment that you can imagine in a society, and not because it had big money come in from outside, but something else happened. So I'll leave it at that, because I think those, I hope, will enrich the, let's say, the core message of what I sensed you were giving us this evening. Thank you. Pleasure to see you again.
Yeah, maybe we could have the three discussants speaking and then.
Sure. I'm not sure whether I switched it on or not, but I have no idea. Is it okay? Okay, good. Well, I think this is really great, and apologies for walking a little bit late, but I could see you building up, and I kept on wondering where you're going to go with all this. And no, and it's really interesting. Yes. Well, privately, we could say something else. No, that's right. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, there's some bits that Rahim is putting his finger on that I actually probably want to develop a little bit. So many years ago, when I came to Oxford, it was to be taught by Amartya Sen, and he made a mistake to go to Harvard, but that's another story. But it is.
His table wasn't high enough.
Yeah, the table wasn't high enough, probably, but one of the things, though, and having been lucky being around when he was trying to begin to lectures and these ideas around capability in there. So I have simply a question. So what's the difference conceptually between this idea of focusing on potential and capability? Or is it just we need to have other words or simpler words maybe to actually approach this? But there's a few things of where there is a lot of agreement, you know, in terms of saying, you say reimagining development. You know, you're having here two former chief economists of different, and then you and FCDO and I differed here. You were kind of slightly slagging us off, but anyway. But there's an interesting thing where actually in the end, I totally agree with, you know. One of the things that is clear, that a whole world of development, of mobilizing support for development, entirely focused on money, that actually is being so, and think of it even with climate, it all begins to turn around money again and the debates on it. Where, you know, and as you correctly say, in a lot of countries, money is not a problem. It's actually how it is used and what one does with it. And that part of it, of course, I totally agree. We also said something like, you know, and this is when you touched upon, say, different worlds and saying, where an international community, I'll call them actually just a bunch of Western countries, that thought of supporting development, and then actually saying, well, because we're going to be doing good, and we're going to go where need is highest, and we're going to countries where there's very high poverty. Now, there's potentially something virtuous about it, but something deeply patronizing, incredibly patronizing, that it's about time we move away from this. but also because the allocation by needs actually reduces how far you want to go with what you do. It's often reduces it from need to doing something good, kind of quite charitable. And if you look back at it, in the end, you know, and you slacked off USAID at some point, you know, I would definitely do this any time, in the sense of, oh, we'll go there, but no, let's not work with the structures, but let's do something separate and let's do it, you know, all kinds of practices. And I'm very glad you called this out also from the US and with CID to actually begin to think about it. But it does leave me somehow a little bit, listening to you, a little bit John Lennon-y, you know, imagine there are no countries. And that's actually, you were touching on it, they're structures, the global structures, local structures, and focusing centrally on people and their potential. But then actually, you know, they are caught by borders. Yes, you make an appeal, courageous appeal. Let's imagine there are no borders. But ultimately there are, and there are structures in which people are sitting. So could you just a little bit about, you know, where does this then fit into it? Because, you know, are we just going to ignore these structures and assuming we can come in? You touched on it, ease of doing business, other things. I mean, deep structures, you know, the story why all these resources flowing in, this kind of natural resource rents from Afghanistan war running into Pakistan, where did they go? How did they be allocated? What happened to them? You know, there's a kind of an entire political Dutch disease that takes place in a country where, you know, as I like to say, Pakistan ended up being run like Algeria, but without the gas, you know, just basically living off these resources to keep structures going. So where does that fit, you know? I know we want to have a positive vision and focus on the potential, but the potential hits on constraints. Aspirations hit on constraining factors. So where do you sit into that? Thank you.
Yeah, Adnan.
So first of all, there's a massive tour de force, and thank you, Adil, for inviting me. So Adil talked about 3 Asims, so let me talk about the 4th Asim. So now you're convinced I'm schizophrenic. Peculiar relationship with poetry. To be normal anyway. Very peculiar relationship with poetry. So I was reminded of Akbar Allama. सूरज में लगे धब्बा फितरत का करिश्मा है वो हमको कहें काफिर अल्लाह की मर्जी है even the sun is eclipsed sometimes God's will now the idols are calling me infidel so this is what is happening so I'm glad that you're coming like finally realize all the pleasures of poetry that my father finally got that way. Yeah. But more seriously, I think a lot of insights and when I look at the world of global development today, most of the discussion, almost all of the discussions are very regressive. They're either dominated by donor cuts, so like USAID closure, right now, FCDO, lots of other things happening, or other things, changes that are happening in the world, whether it's technology, AI, technology moving in a direction which will make that development harder for, say, Sub-Saharan Africa, elsewhere. Climate change and other, lots of other changes that are interacting and making future development harder. When I think of global order, and I see Christian Turner, one of the most brilliant diplomats that this country has produced, and now that I'm sitting here, I can embarrass you. We're coming to the US, by the way. Coming to the US, and who is best posting as UK ambassador to Pakistan. So anytime I went to his office, I saw you know what I got most jealous about was the cricket bat with the autographs of all of the cricket team, including Robert. So he would he and other people who will be addressing global problems. I also see equal depressing uncertainty, volatility in the world order. Whereas what Asim and I think Iqbal shared was a focus on 3 things: so talent, individuals, and agency. What Iqbal also talked about was call it collective societies. I would call that systems. And when I think of like change in the world, I think of like in agency, but also structure. Agency, whether individual or collective, only works within, is either bound by structure or like the systemic perspective that allows, enables individuals to thrive. That's also borne out by your own work in education, which is not only takes an individual view, but also systemic. Here, from what I'm seeing mostly today, mostly an individual view, less of, at least at this point in time, like I would like you to say more about that system structure. I think what all of us are saying, because the biggest, like I think, constraints to also individual talent also happening. They're bound with they're immersed in structures, system structures, whether those are national or global. And how do we make them create the reverse the perverse incentive structure so that like though that potential is realized? Does it take the elites of the world, like does it take like Stefan to work with the elites, say in Pakistan? These are people. And I hope they listen to you, and I hope something good comes. Or is it more like a change from below that also forces some change in the structures, or something that creates or shapes the incentive structure at the top that enables more of this? Like, where is the dynamic and dialectic between the two, which is relevant not just for Pakistan, but also Muslim society that Iqbal cared about, but also globally. So huge potential. The big question is what sparks that potential? Where is that spark? And Iqbal himself, I'll end up with Iqbal again. नहीं है इकबाल नाम भी किस तरह Paul is not disappointed. Just give a little bit of water.
Great. Great. So I suggest a slight change in the program because we've come almost to the end of it. So maybe we have 3 questions. Maybe you could combine those with some of these reflections, and then we'll try and close the event. So there's a roving mic here. Yes, so there's a question here, and then question.
Hello, my name is Serena, and I'm a part of the MPhil in Development Studies program. So for me, this is quite relevant and really enjoyable because it answered a lot of questions that we often discuss in class and also the despair we feel in class sometimes. But I want to ask, with your new model, how do you ensure there's accountability, especially because there's not very many people who have such a deep-seated desire to do good? And how can you ensure that governments are accountable, and will it be governments enacting these programs? And if it's not, do you think that these would take responsibility away from governments and they just will choose to opt out of funding these programs or investing in people? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Asim Saab. My name is Alia Khalid, and you've been very generous with your support since when I was doing my PhD. I like the idea of development as capability to now development as potential. And I can see that your foundations is in ethical individualism rather than, looking at the structures as well. And it's almost like inside looking out. But I can see that you've moved beyond that to now be working on the hub. So my question would be, do you think, I think, to be honest, we have no choice but to look at our own potential. And if truth be told, I think that the borders, maybe it's not such a good idea for the borders to be so porous, in terms of, everything. So my question to you is, firstly, what kind of challenges were there from moving from your index to now the operational kind of hub that you are wanting to run or running? And the second one is in the creation of that index. We do know the multidimensional poverty index and the challenges that were there. So what about the data? Like, are there any challenges that you have hit, and what are the compromises that you've made as a result of that?
Yeah, so this
Is it on?
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. Okay, so my name is Kainat. I am doing DPhil in Social Intervention and Policy Evaluation. I'm an OPP scholar. The economist in me cannot stop commenting on like one of the aspects you shared in your presentation, and also one question for you. The comment is about the way we over celebrate the absolute gains and we forget the relative side of them. For example, with poverty, we know that absolute poverty is going down, but then with relative poverty or the inequality, global inequality, it is not going down. It would be more persistent than, if not like decreasing. So that's like one thing. I think we should be a bit more cautious of celebrating the absolute gains when it comes to these things. And the question would be that with the idea of like assessing the potential in people, I'm thinking, how are you thinking of catering to the people who, for example, maybe are at the extreme level of poverty? For example, kids who cannot even go to public schools to start with, like how do you screen them, or how would you sell this idea to those people, for example, who don't have food to eat, like talking about potential in front of them, like how are you thinking of, you know, making it work in terms of its implementation? Thank you so much.
So Asim, I have a very focused question, which is this, that you are helping rethink development in some way. So just like I had two questions at the end of your talk. One has been raised by the others already, which is this, that when you talk about individuals, how does it really differ from Sen, Mehboob ul Haq, human development, all of that strand? But similarly, you did talk about frictions when you showed the LEAP map. So how is that conceptually different than institutions? Like in institutional economics, Douglas North, all of that is full of that, and we all apply it. So how are your frictions conceptually then different than institutions?
Muhammad Talib. I'm Muhammad Talib, research scholar of Dr. Malik. I just want to say that you mentioned about A.K. Ramanujan, and you also, and so A.K. Ramanujan versus, if I may include Professor Ijaz, Asim Khwaja, is that neither A.K. Ramanujan nor you are organized. And an elite structure is an active ingredient into actually creating problems. For not recognizing potential, it's not that the potential is there and we just need to recognize them. They are actively destroyed. Education, for example, when we talk about education, is a kind of a very internally non-differentiated category. No, it's either part of the commons, social commons, or is commodity as market. So, sir, my question to you is, when you describe this whole from survival to thriving, and I was reading in the background, a kind of a transformation which Iqbal supports, that it should actually shift us or take us from the domination of circumstances, contingencies, and chance over individual to individuals dominating those chance and contingencies. And most of the couplets that we have all shared are very, I must say, very decent, very civilized. But Iqbal also has another couplet, which is that जिस खेत से दहका को मैसर नहीं रोजी, उस खेत के हर होशे गुंदम को जला. And you know, the example that we get, and just this, that we need organized solution for organized structures. That's all. Okay. Thank you.
One other way. It's basically saying, if all those fields which are unable to feed the poor and are just serving the rich, just blow them all. So okay.
Okay, when you've just given us such an exhilarating array of different topics, it seems somehow ungenerous to ask you to comment on yet another. But you didn't say very much about the environment and biodiversity that is the engine of keeping the environment going and its intersection with your view of development?
I'll go really quickly. You mentioned in the beginning that time is the most scarce thing that we have. And on the other side, sorry?
No, no.
Time is the most scarce resource we have, and money is the easiest one essentially that is available. I mean, and then you also mentioned all this, the last 50, 70 years of aid that's gone from Western countries to the developing countries. In that same time, the Western countries have stacked up massive sovereign debt. So essentially, you're printing money and sending it to the poor countries. So I know it's a kind of a, it's a great time and so on, but essentially, do we have to, not that we have to look at it in a bad light, essentially, but it's not necessarily something to celebrate. It's just we've kind of woken up to it, and we should wake up and say it's actually time that matters and people that matter, as opposed to the money, which is essentially printable anyway.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I was just wondering, thank you for the lecture. I was just wondering, and everyone's already touched on this a bit, like just to tie the first part of your lecture to the second, in the face of like development industry collapse, who are the agents that are going to do all of this? Who is doing the recognizing of the potential? It feels like a lot of the onus, you seem to set it on the individual in terms of the frontier that you described and all of that, but then who does the recognizing, and more importantly, maybe how do you convince them to do the recognizing?
The world needs to.
So I'm from Sudan. My father, he's fan of Iqbal, and we have Iqbal book in our home since long time. And my name is Al Mubashir, which is a Pakistani name. So I'm a physician. So what do you think about leadership? Because in the end, without sound and proper leadership, all what you are saying, it will be something. Yeah. So about leadership.
Let me respond to reverse order. I think I have the mic, huh? Okay.
Yeah, that's for
This idea of leadership and agents, I want to kind of mix. I have a peculiar view of this, which is we give. Let me put it in a box. Now I'll say something about it. Which is, I think when we tell the narrative of us, often it's a narrative of the smart lawyer, the green bee. And I think I'm not saying that's a wrong narrative, but in that narrative, we tend to forget that these individuals are the product of different things. Right? And so for me, leadership in many ways is exogenous with the strength of a population. Right. And so when we think of agents or leadership or things like that, I'm a big believer in the kind of law of averages. I'm a big believer that the rising tide lifts all. And I feel like often, historically, when we look at these moments, we attribute a lot to the individual. I joke with my finance friends to say, man, I don't understand why CEOs get paid so much. And someone tells me, well, the CEO made this amazing deal, which was worth $1 billion. So shouldn't they be deserving to walk away with 10 million? And my instance is, no, that deal was a product of a substantial number of people. And so that resource isn't spread. So again, I'm not saying leaders are visibly not important, but instead of focusing on creating leaders, I want to focus on creating the kind of environment in the population that will both generate those leaders, and there's a question of accountability, which would hold those leaders accountable. And in many ways, Pakistan, what is fascinating about Imran is not Imran. Right? Imran is as despotic, sorry for those who love PTI, my mom does, so I apologize to her, is the same to me as the Sharifs are or the Bhuttos are. But what is fascinating about Imran is a product of a much more engaged populace. The dirty secret in the army, and this is being recorded, so the OPP is done, is the army will never take a vote of Imran's possibility amongst its own soldiers. Because if it does, it'll not like what it hears.
And so there is a fascination of what Imran has done, which is and that I give Imran credit for, is tapped into what people deeply feel they want. But Imran as a leader, I don't think is the right person. But I think Imran as a vehicle of reflecting, the same is true for Trump, by the way, and the same is true for Mamdani. In some sense, as much as we're fascinated by Trump and Mamdani, and as much as they're brilliant in different ways, what I think their essence of power is that they tend to become lenses or reflections of individuals. And I mean, this comes back to, I think, Stefan's point, and Atif and I disagree on this. And I don't have a view on which way to start. I mean, I'm very moved by Stefan's view, and Atif's view is similar to Stefan's, which is sometimes, if Stefan looks at the historical sort of analysis of development, there are clear moments when a collective comes together and amazing change happens. And I think at some level, each of us takes a different bet. Even though I like Stefan's and Atif's and others' bet, I also want to take a different bet. And I think both bets need to be taken because we can't afford not to. We can't afford to think there's a singular vision of development. The bet I want to take is a much slower moving bet. And I concede that, right? The reason I said I have another, in expectation, 25 years of work left is I actually think it'll take that long. And I'm okay with that. I've come to terms with the idea that the impact at best I can have in the world is a very slow moving, and my type is fine with that. And so I hope that we'll create these conditions where we have the individuals who will both support leaders, some will become leaders, but a lot of them will hold leaders accountable. A lot of them will enable us to be in societies where we're challenged. I mean, we have a student sitting over there who I'm very fond of, and I'm very fond of him because a year ago he was really harsh to me, but in a best way possible. Right? You can ask, I won't tell you what happened. Asmer can tell you the story. But I have a deep respect and love for him because I think he did for us, he held us accountable in a way that I thought we had to be held accountable. And as much as I resented that moment when I felt being attacked, and that's natural human instinct. But I still, in both at that moment, there was a part of me which was loving him as much as I was annoyed by him. And over time, the love has increased and the annoyance has decayed down. So I think there's a sense in that. And I would say the same about agents of change as well. So that you'd asked this question about institutional frictions. I actually think, I'm not trying to come up with new ideas necessarily. I'm simply thinking I don't think there's very many new ideas in the world. I think often what we do is we rediscover. Like, I love the fact that you associated my ideas with Sen. I take that as a huge compliment. And they are. Right? In many ways, Sen was also my teacher. In many ways, what I'm doing is building on Sen's idea of capabilities. Sen was a theorist. I'm an empiricist. And for me, it's nice to say these things. I'm an empiricist. I'm an activist. I'm a builder, as Adil said. I want to take these ideas further and say, how do we build a measurement to this thing? Because the war I'm having is a numbers war. I have friends of mine like Paul Novosad, who's done brilliant work on Give Directly, which is this agency trying to give money to people. And Paul says we should focus on poverty and it's going to cost $1 trillion a year. I want to come up to Paul and say, no, we should focus on potential and it's going to add 200 trillion. And to have that debate, I need to have an infrastructure and a sort of language and numbers behind it and data behind it, which allows me to do that. But I'd be honored if someone said, Asim, all you're doing is making Sen a bit more practical. And that's the biggest gift. You know, when someone tells you you're like your teacher, I love that idea. I'm reflecting. So I'm a small reflection of Sen's ideas, and I'm very happy with that, right? I don't want to back away from that at all. So institutional economics, yes. The idea of frictions, yes. But what I want to acknowledge is sometimes institutional economics becomes a vague term. What is this institution? I want to make it really pedantic. The friction is literally, I went to a school and I didn't know whether I was taught well or not. That's a friction to me, right? So if you make it this dry and pedantic, then I want to start creating really careful measures on these things, which we can systematically and regularly do. Now, those measures could become an index of institutional failure in the way we can talk about it, but I want to make it sort of real like that. Kainat, you talked about over-celebrating and not recognizing that there's huge issues with relative deprivation as well. I agree with you, right? And I don't think that's what I was saying. In fact, you know, you guys didn't pick up on something which I hid from you, and let me just now reveal. This idea of potential is also deeply troubling. It's deeply troubling because when you do the math, honestly, the biggest gains in that 200 million or the 300 or 400 trillion, comes not from the bottom 70% actually. It'll come from the entire top of the distribution. Now, you as society will have to make a decision. Are you comfortable with that? Are you comfortable in your own countries creating more mosques? I don't have a value judgment there. I don't know. But it's a question we will have to grapple, that to achieve this full potential, we will have to create unicorns. And then the question becomes, do those unicorns, this is a really interesting question, which I have friends like Gabriel Zuckman and others work on this. If you were to tax Musk 95%, he loses almost all his money. Would Musk not exist? And that's a deeper question for us as society to say. And this is a big question we're debating in taxation to say, would we lose the people who become entrepreneurs if they can't be worth several trillion? Right? I don't know the answer to that, but I, as an empiricist, I want us to bring us back to say we should grapple with it and we should test it and we should see how society does. But these are deep decisions to worry about. Alia, you talked about I can't read my own. Oh, creating the index, right? I am no means starting to do this really well. There's huge data issues over here. In fact, Paul's paper is phenomenal in the sense that he says there's massive mismeasurement in per capita income measures. And so typically the simple measure says to alleviate poverty, you need 200 billion. Paul estimates to a bunch of fancy math and machine learning, it's actually 1 trillion. And the reason he does it is he says we're miscounting the poor. And so I think my hope is to start an agenda where we start measuring these things. It's not at all to be the end all or be all. I don't think. I just want to put an idea out there, have people disagree with it, debate it, and some people would do it well, some people won't. But, you know, वो किसका शेर है यार होंठों पे क्या वो पढ़ के सुना देंगे यार
आई सही इल्जाम तो हाँ
थैंक यू
होंठों पे कभी उनके
हाँ होंठों पे मेरा
होंठों पे कभी उसके मेरा नाम
So what I love about that is even if you curse me, I'm still grateful for you because you're mentioning me. And I think the worst thing you can do in life is not be memorable. So the point I'm trying to do is just put some ideas which are memorable. You disagree with them, that's great. You engage with them, you improve them, right? And so in some sense, that's all I'm trying to do. Serena, आपका accountability का मैंने बात कर ली थी. तालिब साहब, आपकी I completely agree with you. We're actively suppressing this. Right, we're actively suppressing this potential emergence. आपने कहा था ना शायद. And then the question becomes, how do we undo that? I think you're exactly right. I have long thoughts on that. We can maybe go offline on that. But I think the way you're putting it is it's not just a passive failure. It's an active suppression in many cases. And that is deeply troubling to say, why is there an incentive in society to have that active suppression going on? And there's lots of political economy stories. People better than me can tell about that. I think I'll end over here. The environmental question, sorry. I'll get an answer which you won't be happy with. So let me just give it and then I'll deal with the aftermath. I'm not too worried about that. I am and I'm not. I'm taking a bet on my own colleagues who are brilliant, who are in this space. And so my hope is as fast as we're destroying the environment, there amongst us a set of people who are working even more smartly to fix the problems we're creating. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't worry about it. I would be deeply worried if funding goes away from this space, which I am. I'd be deeply worried if we think this isn't worthy of study. That's deeply, so what the US is doing now is deeply troubling for me because we're telling a bunch of, especially young people, that this is not a space you should be building your careers in. And I think that's problematic. But I'm relying in a bizarre way in the way, if I was in Malthus's contemporary, I would be having an argument with Malthus to say, hey, the green revolution is going to happen. Let's make sure the green revolution happens. Now, what does that mean? Will we reverse the damage we're creating? Would we repopulate some area? Would we go into the oceans? I don't know, right? But I'm putting my faith in that. Now, it's a very tricky thing to do, right? I could be terribly wrong. And so that's why I want people to say, no, you can't possibly do this, right? And so I'm not trying to make a statement that we should all be doing this, but that's the way I'm thinking about it, which is why there are lots of things I deeply worry about. But in my naive view of the world, I'm saying every one of those things, I want to find individuals who are obsessed and passionate about them and make sure they're unconstrained in what they're doing, and then hope for the best. So it's a silly answer, but that's the way I feel about the world. I think that's pretty much, I don't know if I apologize if I missed someone. If I do, just ask me afterwards and I'll try my best to answer.
Thank you so much. So my name is Talab Izada. I'm a lecturer in material science here at the University of Oxford, and I'm also the development lead for the Oxford Pakistan program. And it's my immense privilege to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the OPP. Would like to start by expressing my deepest gratitude to our speaker. Vote of thanks, thanking everyone who was involved in helping. We have to thank everyone. Would like to particularly thank Abdul Ghani Dadabhoy and the Dadabhoy Foundation, who made this lecture and supported this lecture from the inception. Their vision and generosity have played a major role in making events like these possible. On behalf of the OPP, I would like to thank the Lady Margaret Hall, especially Honor and Jack, who made this evening possible. I would also like to acknowledge the OPP scholars and the OPP team who've actually worked behind the scenes to make this event possible. And of course, my heartfelt thanks to all of you sitting in this room and all of the students who've joined online and attended this event all across Pakistan. Before closing, I want to recognize three key individuals whose presence we have daily missed tonight. Abdul Ghani Dadabhoy, who wasn't able to attend because of family emergency. Second, our co-founder, our management lead, Harun Zaman, who's sitting in exam and wasn't able to fly across the pond from Columbia University. And lastly, the late Dr. Ijaz Khwaja, the father of Professor Asim Khwaja, an admirer of Iqbal, who recited couplets to his children when they were growing up. And he would have been extremely honored to attend this evening and to see your lecture. But we're, however, honored to have Mrs. Ijaz Khwaja with us tonight. She's flown in from Pakistan, and we're privileged to welcome her here. And I would like to offer this. I would like to end this night with a couplet of Allama Muhammad Iqbal. Nukte hai sab na tamam. Nukta hai sab na tamam. Pune jigar ke baghair. Nukta hai sab na tamam. Pune jigar ke baghair. Naghme hai sodae kham. Pune jigar ke baghair. Every creation remains incomplete without intense passion. Every melody is but a raw obsession without the fire of passion. What moves me about this couplet is how Iqbal brings together two worlds we often separate, the analytical and the emotional. He reminds us that no matter how advanced our models or our institutions are, meaningful progress still depends on something deeper. Khune jigar, inner fire, moral conviction, and the courage to persist when the work is slow and difficult. In many ways, that is the essence of development. Real change is never just a policy or a data set. It is driven by people who care enough to keep going, who carry a sense of responsibility, who believe their effort can open doors for others. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you once again for making this evening memorable and wonderful. We would love for you to join all of us in the monsoon room for drinks after this. Thank you so much.
Hey, are you going to say? Well, you know,